Hey everyone, just a quick heads up. The audio in this episode is a little bit rough because we're undergoing some renovations at our home. So there's some bumping and banging in the background. Nonetheless, this is 30 days of podcast episodes, so the show must go on. Let's get started. You're listening to the Inspired Guide Podcast, episode 32. All right, welcome back to the month-long rollout of brand new episodes. I'm your host, Darlene, and I thought this episode would be a good one to get a little bit reacquainted because, well, it's been a minute since I've been behind the mic. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, I asked my A-list group, that's what I call them, my A-list, a group of people to send me their questions so that I can answer them on the podcast this month. One of my clients, who is just curious by nature, sent me questions on all the things, and I thought those questions would lend themselves nicely to one episode all about getting reacquainted. And so before I jump into her questions, here's just a short, brief overview of who I am. Well, I'm Darlene. Hi, nice to meet you. I've been running my home-based business since February 2008, and I started out as a tech and general virtual assistant and moved into podcast production and consulting around 2009, about a year or so after I started producing podcasts of my own. So I've actually been producing podcasts since May 2008, and it's definitely turned into a passion of mine. I'm the youngest child of 3. I grew up with 2 older brothers, and my mom was a single mom, and she's always been one of my biggest fans, one of my best friends. She is an amazing mom. And my husband is also one of my best friends, and we've been together since 1995, and more on him shortly, because that is one of the questions my client asked me about. I'm also a mom. I became a mom in 2016 to a beautiful, smart, and entertaining little boy. I started running back in 2013, my husband and I, and since I became a mom, however, I more consider my running to be more of a WOG. So that's W-O-G, a WOG, so walking/jogging. But I really love being outside, and so doing my wogging gets me outside in nature. I like being in the yard. I love gardening. I just love everything that the outdoors has to offer. And so that's me in a nutshell. I mean, there's so many other layers. We'll dig into some of those now with some of the, what I'd like to call AMA questions, Ask Me Anything, submitted by my client, Andrea. So here we go. First, how did you meet your husband? What was the best thing about being married? Or what is the best thing about being married? And what's the hardest thing? So, interestingly enough, my husband and I met online back in 1995. So online looked a lot different. This was right before AOL. It was definitely the dial-up era. We met on, back then they were called BBSs. So we met via a local BBS. And the rest is history. What's the best thing about being married? So, the best thing is just basically always having my partner in crime with me. So he's always there to lean on, laugh with, to vent to, and just enjoy life with. Always having that, my person with me, having my favorite person right nearby. And the hardest is, sometimes I struggle with communicating my thoughts, my wants or needs like an adult. Sometimes I come off sounding like just a little bratty baby. So that's been the hardest, learning to communicate clearly with compassion and as an adult, not being snarky or anything like that. That's always the hardest. So then she wants to turn to parenting, and she asked, what has been your hardest parenting moment and how did you get through? Well, right now, the biggest one, and it's been this way for a while, and I don't know if it'll ever, ever go away, because from what I see in articles and all of that, it's just a thing. And it's getting our son dressed to get ready to go out in the morning. Either the clothes are too tight, or they're too big, or he doesn't want to get dressed, or the shoes, you put the shoes on and they're off 2 seconds later. Just trying to take a step back, take a few breaths, breathe, and not get all like, oh, because I'm definitely the kind of person where we have to be places on time. So that already has me on edge. So just trying to rein that in. Some mornings I get through it amazingly and make a game out of it and redirect him, and we're good. And then other mornings it's just, I kind of have to grit my teeth and take a few deep breaths and we get through it. So yeah, that's been my hardest one. If you have any advice, anybody out there, games, something fun to make getting dressed and ready in the morning fun, let me know. I'm all ears. This one was funny. This one made me laugh out loud a little bit when I read it. Do you wash your body or your hair first in the shower? I wash my face first, then I wash my hair. I guess my body. But it's just my face. Then I do the hair, and then I move on to all the other body parts. Hopefully your inquiring mind is now at peace. Are you afraid of clowns? So interestingly, no. The answer is no. And in fact, some people will probably find this strange and might stop listening right now. I have a painting in my living room that has 2 clowns. It's a clown painting. And so yeah, you probably think I'm a little weird. One of my besties even asked me about it recently. My grandfather loved clowns. He had several clown paintings, and when he passed away, my mom got one. One of my older brothers got one of the paintings, and I got one of the paintings. So we loved our grandpa, so in turn, we love his clown paintings. Fun side story is my son named the clowns, and they are called, and this is, I asked him the other day, what are the clowns' names? And he said, Booba and Booba. 2 Boobas. So I thought that was fitting. All right, next question. What's your favorite holiday and why? I love Christmas just because Christmas has always been a holiday where we're surrounded by family, and it just brings back just a lot of nostalgia. I love baking, and that's, as a family of 3, I don't bake often because we don't need to eat that much baked goods. So around Christmas time, I love to do baking. I love baking cookies and cakes and pies and all of that good stuff, because then I can bring it to the various holiday parties, share it with friends and family that come over. So that's why I love Christmas. My grandmother loved baking, and I just love carrying on that tradition. Andrea then goes on to ask, what is your favorite Thanksgiving dish? Well, the dish that my family loves me to make at Thanksgiving is my sweet potato casserole. They love it. And my favorite dish, though, is pretty boring. It's actually the turkey with gravy and a side serving of cranberry sauce. I've made the relish cranberry sauce in the past, and I really enjoyed it, but my family was just like, no, please pass the can. So if you're curious whether I'm talking about a side serving of fresh cranberry or cranberry in a can, if it's the fresh cranberry sauce I make, yes. If it's like the fresh cranberry sauce you have out at places where they decide to add the raisins and stuff to it, no. I'll take the can over that any day. Thank you very much. Next, what do I like to read? Well, I've loved horror novels, honestly, since I was a teenager, since about 13 years old. And yes, when I was very young, I did read the Sweet Valley Twins. I read some of the Sweet Valley High books, and I did read some Babysitter Club books. Once I turned 12, 13, I found R.L. Stine at our local library, and I was hooked. So I read all of the Fear Street R.L. Stine novels. I don't think I read any, if any, of the Goosebumps that most of the kids from the 90s probably are familiar with. And then I moved on to like Dean Koontz, Robin Cook, all of those authors. And I've occasionally read Stephen King, but his style of writing really isn't my favorite. I think if I had to pick a favorite horror writer, it's Dean Koontz, and I loved Odd Thomas. I did enjoy The Green Mile by Stephen King. That was probably one of my favorite book series by him. The next question is, what is your favorite podcast? And so first, is this a trick question? If so, then it's your Kick-Ass Life podcast. But in all seriousness, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so it's hard for me really to pick just one. But I can tell you the genres that I like. Pop tech, stories inspired by real life. So think about like This American Life, or things where I'm learning things like Stuff You Should Know. I also like true crime podcasts as well. What movie can you easily quote? Forrest Gump, hands down. It's one of my favorite movies. When I graduated high school in 1995, I was so excited because our principal, who was doing like the farewell speech, just dropped a bazillion different Forrest Gump quotes in his speech. And I was just like a kid in a candy store. I was so giddy. I thought it was awesome. I still do to this day. I think a lot of other kids in my class thought it was corny and were groaning, but yeah, Forrest Gump. What makes you really mad? I'm just going to answer this very briefly. The U.S. healthcare system. I get so angered by it, and I'm not even going to go there in this episode. I can probably go on a rant, and no one wants to hear Darlene rant. So we'll just leave it at the U.S. healthcare system. Makes me very mad. And then she asked me the last question that Andrea asked me. Who broke your heart and what happened? So I met my husband when I was about 18, moving on 19, and we've been together since. Sitting here pondering, but nobody wants to hear a podcast where I'm just sitting here pondering. I guess it would be when my grandfather passed away. That broke my heart. He was like my father. I didn't have a father growing up. He wasn't in our lives. And so my grandfather was that for me. He was my father figure. And so when he passed away, it was really heartbreaking. And I love him with all of my heart. So that broke my heart. So there's your answer. Let's see. Is there any other shining moments where we can end this on a high note? Well, I can say thank you so much, Andrea, for submitting your questions. There are a couple more that I did not answer here that I will be answering in other episodes throughout this month, but I really appreciate you taking the time. That's it for this episode. As always, be inspired by the most important person in your life, you. Until tomorrow, this is Darlene Victoria, signing out. If you want to learn more about me or get connected, follow me on Instagram. I hang out over there under @DV Podcast.